Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to this panel discussion on artificial intelligence, ethics, and governance. I am your moderator, Chan Heng Chee, Professor of Political Science at the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities in the Singapore University of Technology and Design. This evening, we have a very timely and important topic to discuss, seeing how AI is pervading all aspects of our lives and all aspects of the economy. As you know, there's a buzz around people, governments, decision makers, all feel that we must do something about the rules of the road for the world of AI. And UNESCO, just in November 2021, came up with a global agreement on the use of AI. 193 countries, members of the UNESCO, supported this. But they are guidelines, and national governments still have to come up with specifics for the regulation and the laws. Now, before I begin, I would like to invite the audience to send in their questions. This is important, via the Q&A tab, which is located under the session tab. We will have about 30 minutes of Q&A after the panelists have spoken and taken a question or two. Then you can pose your question directly to the panelists. If your question has been selected, our secretariat team will tag you in the chat. Please click on the yellow box on the right corner of the screen labeled Share Audio and Video so that we can see who you are. Now, once you are on the screen, please introduce yourself and the institution you are from before you ask your question. This evening, we hope to cover 3 content areas for the discussion. Firstly, how AI is a powerful force. Secondly, the challenges in regulating AI and the ethical concerns arising from this. And thirdly, how we can create a world where AI can be a force for good. And with us this evening are 3 distinguished panelists. They are Professor Leslie Valiant, who is a professor of computer science and applied mathematics at Harvard University. His work straddles theoretical computer science, particularly complexity science, learning, and parallel computation. He received the 2010 Turing Award in part for his contributions to machine learning. Our second panelist is Professor Simon Chesterman, Dean and Provost Chair, Professor from the National University of Singapore's Faculty of Law. Professor Chesterman is also the Senior Director of AI Governance at AI Singapore. He has authored 21 books, including We the Robots, Regulating Artificial Intelligence, and Limits of the Law. And our third speaker is Professor Cédric Villani. He is a French mathematician who has received numerous awards, including the Fields Medal, which is described as a Nobel Prize of Mathematics. In 2017, he was elected member of the French Parliament, where he champions several subjects rooted in science and particularly ecology. His report on artificial intelligence became the basis of the French strategy of AI. So you can see we have the absolutely right speakers to tackle the subject before us today. Professor Valiant, would you take the floor, please?
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you
for
have
5 to 7 minutes.
Okay. So thank you for inviting me, and thanks for all the audience for coming. probably all times of the day and night for various of you. So perhaps I should start with a few comments on the nature of AI. So machine learning is a computational technique for detecting patterns, and much of the current excitement and concern about AI center on the power of machine learning. So a different but older technique in AI is search, and this led to powerful chess-playing programs. It was obvious to anyone in the field that these programs would eventually beat the world chess champion, which they did in the 1990s. But somehow this had no broader implications. In these game-playing endeavors, perhaps one finds out that humans are not as good as one thought. Machine learning is much closer to how humans function, I believe. It finds patterns in data and uses them to make predictions. One can argue that this learning process captures much of human learning and even biological evolution. So this would explain why it covers such a broad area of human capabilities, why it's so powerful. As far as its power, there are many reported cases of machine learning doing things beyond human capabilities. One of the many examples is the study of the retinas, the human eye. So it's been found that with machine learning, one can distinguish between the retinas of men and women quite accurately, which apparently none of the thousands of human eye doctors had ever observed before. Language translation is an application we can all be impressed by. It's an ideal application since in doing it, it's useful to analyze enormous amounts of data, which machines are good at, and making mistakes isn't fatal to anyone. So a related application is the detection of offensive or false content from web pages, an area that is much more controversial. While AI may make the spread of such content easier, it also offers a defense against it because it can detect it. Also very interesting are widely reported applications to protein folding, that is predicting the physical structure and chemical properties of proteins, and in high energy physics in detecting new particles. So this powerful technology for detecting patterns is useful in almost every human activity. Why the cause for concern? But personally, I was alerted to this concern at the dawn of the World Wide Web in the 1990s, when people were already trying to use machine learning to predict individual consumer behavior when shopping online. They were capturing information about individuals and using it to respond to them. Now, this made me uneasy, both because of the privacy issue, that the information was captured that the individual did not suspect was being captured, and also because the information was used in ways which the individual had no control over. The breadth of application of machine learning now is much greater and broader than this, as are the challenges. So where are we now? The central issue, I think, is simply that machine learning is able to do many things humans do, and sometimes much better. So what's problematic about this? One can argue that many of the problems that arise with machine learning are old, and they arose already when humans were doing these things, doing these tasks themselves. For example, there's a problem of fairness to minorities. If the data one learns from has few examples of a minority, then the learning will be less accurate on that group, unless one makes efforts to get more data about that minority. But even though these problems are old, the scale and the greater ease with which machines can analyze data brings this issue to a different level. Another example is surveillance, which again is not new, but machine learning changes the scale and the ease. Besides the scale and the ease, a second issue is that the link of responsibility that existed between a human decision maker and their decisions is much weaker between the software writer and the decisions that the software which results makes. This weakening of the link of responsibility is something new. But as with several of these problems, there are technical approaches for doing it. There's room for scientists to contribute. So here, for example, it would involve contributing to new standards for specifying AI programs. So this brings me to the last question. How comfortable are we in having machines make decisions for us? Humans have to decide. Is it okay for a machine to reject an applicant for a job or a university place, to operate a lethal weapon, to start a war, to govern a country? We can assume that humans will take advice from machines in the future in all these areas, but will we allow machines to make the final call? So, thank you.
Now, Simon, could you talk about the attempts that have been made to regulate AI and some of the issues involved?
Sure, thanks. And I think Professor Valiant has really highlighted some of the enormous potential for artificial intelligence generally, machine learning in particular, to transform whole areas of society and the economy. Heng Chee, you mentioned at the outset UNESCO's recent document. This is one of literally hundreds of documents that have sought to outline ethical frameworks, guides, principles to govern this new technology, which, again, as Professor Valiant has highlighted, has enormous potential for good, but also the potential for harm. And he emphasized the harm to individuals who might be discriminated against, classes of individuals. But I'll also pick up on what he was saying towards the end, that there are potentially larger implications for society. And it's striking that these hundreds of documents really came out in the last 5 or 6 years. And there was a big uptick around 2016 to 2018, when there were a large number of these efforts to outline how we might rein in artificial intelligence, the use of data in particular. And it's no coincidence that this happened at the same time as we were learning more about the Cambridge Analytica scandal and the abuse of data accumulated through Facebook, which it was revealed had the potential not just to engage in identity theft or discrimination, but arguably to change the course of an election in the United States and potentially the course of world history. So clearly there are issues here. We need to draw on the benefits of AI. How do we mitigate the risks? And one of the problems, I think, is precisely that we've leaped too quickly to the what question. What rules should there be? And this, I think, misunderstands the problem posed by AI as being both too hard and too easy. Too hard in that it suggests that we must reinvent the wheel, that we must come up with entirely new laws to govern these enterprises, when often the real question is precisely how we apply existing laws to AI systems. You shouldn't be able to do something through an AI system that you can't do yourself. I mean, many of these guides say you shouldn't be able to discriminate, you shouldn't be able to harm, you shouldn't be able to violate privacy. Well, you shouldn't be able to do that as an individual. A corporation shouldn't be able to do it. And so similarly, you shouldn't be able to do such things through an AI system. So I think it's helpful to take a step back and ask 3 questions about the regulation and governance of AI. And those are why, when, and how. The why question really is begging this question: what are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to do? And often what we're trying to do is mitigate the risks associated with AI. And that's the purpose of regulation generally. We're trying to address market failures. We're trying to make the market efficient so that if, for example, an autonomous vehicle hits someone, the right person is held responsible. But not all regulation is just about market efficiency. We regulate all sorts of things because we want to promote certain social goods. So, for example, on the matter of discrimination, even if it were efficient to discriminate against an individual or a class of individuals, even if it would mitigate certain risks, we shouldn't discriminate on that basis because of fundamental values that we hold dear. So those are some of the things that we're trying to do. We're trying to avoid market failure. We're trying to preserve certain values. But a separate set of issues for many countries is that they're also very wary of undermining their own competitiveness. They're wary of constraining innovation, driving innovation elsewhere. And that's why AI, I think, poses a particular challenge to many countries because they don't want to be left behind. And so there is a certain wariness. And this raises the second question, which is when to innovate. And here I'll fall back on a 32-year-old book called The Social Control of Technology by David Collingridge. And he posed what is now known as the Collingridge dilemma, which is that at an early stage of development of a new technology, it's easy to regulate because the costs are low. You can impose barriers, you can require certain activities. The problem is you don't know exactly what harms you're trying to prevent, and there is that danger of constraining innovation. And so often the incentive is to wait. But the other part of the dilemma is if you wait too long until the harms become clear, the costs of regulation go up, and it's harder to innovate. It's harder to constrain that innovation. It's harder to constrain the harms that you've now identified. And we can see that, for example, with social media. If you were back in 2004 and foresaw some of the problems we face now with what was then the Facebook before it became Facebook and now Meta, you might have approached regulation quite differently, and you might have been able to constrain it. But it's a very different challenge back in 2022. And this leads me to my third question that I think is important to contemplate as we look at the regulation of AI, which is how we should regulate. And I think one of the other problems here is there is a tendency to think that one solution will fit all, when often we're trying to do at least 3 separate things in the regulation of AI. In some situations, all we really want to do is mitigate the risk. We have a kind of utilitarian approach. We want to get the benefits of potentially safer vehicles with driverless vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and minimize the risks associated with them. We want to achieve efficiencies through AI, which AI is often very good at. But in some circumstances, we don't just want efficiency. We do want to draw certain moral red lines. And Professor Valiant highlighted in passing one of them that I would point to, which is the delegation of the decision over life and death in, for example, a military conflict. And I think for many people, lethal autonomous weapons point to a line that we might want to maintain, that we should not be we should not be delegating decisions over life and death to machines any more than we should be delegating it to anyone else. And this is linked to the third area of a different approach to regulating AI, which is that in some situations, it's not just that we want a rational, optimal decision, nor that we even just want a human to be making the decision, for example, in the context of lethal autonomous weapons. But some decisions are intended to be made by public authorities, not because they're the best decision maker necessarily, nor because they're simply a human, but because they exist within a political hierarchy, and that's the job we've given them. And so there are certain classes of decision, public sector decisions, that should not be handed over to machines because the legitimacy of those decisions comes precisely from the office holder. And so an easy example, I think, for many of us would be, in my own area of work, a judge who determines the fate of an individual before him or her, whether they go to prison or not, whether they are awarded compensation or not. The judge makes the decision within a hierarchy, and the judge should not be outsourcing that decision to a machine any more than he or she should be outsourcing it to a corporation. So for all these reasons, I think the question of regulating AI does pose very interesting, challenging questions, but I would submit at least that it's more than one question. And I'll hold off there, but I'm very much looking forward to the Q&A to come.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Now, Professor Cédric Villani, you are a theoretician, you think, and you are also a doer. And you have produced ideas that have become a strategy for your government on AI. Can you discuss what the future of AI could bring in an ideal scenario, and how can governments and corporations ensure that AI is being used well and implemented well?
Hello, thank you very much for this invitation. Does anybody hear me clearly? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. It's great pleasure again to interact with GYSS, with which I have spent such great time in the past. And it's great to be always there for the high-level discussions, which are so useful, I hope, for the young generation. I will start by saying the obvious, that to know how to make AI work good, you have to know what can be the bad side. What are the examples of bad scenario and bad examples of AI? And I have to quote the important landmark book of Cathy O'Neill in the field, Weapons of Math Destruction, Math like Mathematics, which was a shock for many scientists in AI, because it showed, going through example after example with careful analysis, how a number of use cases of AI already implemented in various parts of the world, especially in the United States, were posing a lot of ethical problems. Sometimes because it was not a problem of bad will, but sometimes because it was used carelessly, or because there were some mistakes in the implementation, like bias, like reproducing human mistakes, or like bad lack of rigor in what was going on. Sometimes because AI was used by people or companies with lack of ethics, and so using it for their interest, not the interest of other people. There's an example discussed in the book about how some state in the United States believes that they can improve the quality of teachers with an AI-based ranking system for the teachers that would be more, you know, less biased than the system of notation by human beings, and they want to select the best teachers. And in fact, it was a disaster, the opposite of what you would expect, with the result as the best teachers were expelled from the system. Or another example is predictive police, with examples in which, by trying to predict where the next crime or the next incident will occur, the police goes more in this place and finds incidents, and the prediction becomes a self-realizing prediction. Another example is when it's about optimizing the schedules of employees in a company. If the optimization is done in such a way that the schedules become unbearable for the people because it's so fragmented, or the hours are so impossible to live clearly, then the program may be efficient, but the lives of the people may be ruined. So there were like this a number of examples, concrete examples, which showed all the problem. At the time, there was very little reflection about how what was going to happen. We could see some early warnings, but the book really changed the game about this. And then a number of people worked, as was described by the two lecturers before me, worked on finding some rules, how to ensure the bias, that there is a good quality of service, that there is good transparency, etc., etc. And the international organizations have worked on this, national have worked on this. Now there's an excellent agreement on what we should aim, and hundreds literally of reports and papers on the ethics and governance of AI have been produced with very good agreement. The real challenge is to put them in place, detect the bad behavior, and see how we observe the whole system and manage the good use of it all. Let me insist on some features which you would not think of necessarily in the first place, but which are important. First, the fact that AI will be efficient, but indistinctly for, to put it frankly, the good side and the bad side. Suppose, for instance, you will say, okay, AI is very important in the environmental transition because it will help us find the ways to economize the energy, or to put the right solar panels there, etc., etc. That's right, but AI will also be of great help for those who want to drill more oil, and those who want to make more advertisements which are more efficient for fossil fuels, cars and mechanisms and whatever. So the fact that AI can go in the right direction will not spare you the necessity to make the choices when there is one choice, and to put the money on one place and the investment. AI will facilitate, but it will facilitate at the same time the good and the bad side. So you have to be very careful, very much aware of this. Let me give another example. When the issue is about how to define the goal. What is good politics, and how can AI be of an auxiliary to politics? There are some programs of AI which have been developed over the past years and to help the politicians, for instance, win an election, like putting a better cartography of the citizens and say they are more sensitive to this issue in that district, that issue in the district, etc. And you can think, okay, that's great, because then politicians will better know the field, they will be better prepared for making the right campaign with the right subjects, etc. But it may also encourage politicians to say one thing in a district, another thing in another district, to adapt their speech to the many, many possibilities and frameworks, and to have AI-based auxiliary that will transform their speech in such a way that for each bubble of conversation, it will be a different speech. It's this integration of politics in which the politician will just become a machine in saying what the elector, what the citizen wants to hear, and that would be a disaster if it is pushed. I have seen in some innovation competitions some hard disputes between the jury and the innovator just for this precise issue of this AI-based politics system. Let me give another issue. When it's about shaping jobs, sometimes a practice which may seem disturbing is it plus or no? It may be difficult to say. Professor Chesterman mentioned the issue of hiring people. Now we have data and we have studies showing that automatic analysis of curriculum vitae in general is more efficient if it's done with the right program than the human conversation to decide whom you should hire, because there are so many human bias in the conversation that very often you hire somebody because you like that person and not because that's the best resume and the best skills. But then it may be a shock to say, okay, I'm going to be hired in that human organization, and it will just be a program that will decide where's the libre arbitre, where's the possibility of the free choice, etc. And we really have a choice to make the society, and it's an ethic dilemma in which you have to put in place the efficiency, the fact that what you want, sometimes that you also need to have some basic matching of personalities, but accept that for some to recognize the fact that human is very poor at some tasks, including some of the basic tasks of fair judgment, etc. It's one of the major themes of the recent book by Dan Kahneman and co-authors, Noise, insisting on how we humans are very poor at certain tasks. Last but not least, to know what AI will bring, even if it's performed well, as a reorientation of society, changing the ordering and the hierarchy of some jobs, the power relations and so on. We really have to observe and make experiments because nobody knows how it will work in practice. I remember the words of a minister for some Asian country, which I will keep confidential here, who told me in private discussion, you know, AI is the greatest inequalizer ever. Whenever a situation you apply it to, it tends to favor inequality. And this is something that we have to be extremely careful about and to observe and make experiments.
Oh, thank you very much, Professor Villani. I think there is, I sense some grounds for disagreement, but I'm going to take the questions that are posed first by the audience before I raise some questions following, what each of you have said. First of all, may I just remind the audience, please put in your question into the Q&A chat so that we can answer your questions. There are quite a few of you, and all of you are very intelligent scientists, global young scientists, so we look forward to your questions. But let me begin with Francis Buckland Willis. Can you please press on the orange box and press share video, audio and video, so that we can see you? Ah, there you are.
Hi.
Hi. Yes.
Hi.
Would you like to repeat your question?
Yeah, so my question was just basically how do you envision the process of appealing against decisions made by AI systems? Because obviously it's not always obvious the way they make these decisions, and how do you prove bias and things like that in a legal sense?
Yeah, it's bias. It's appeal processes, the appeals processes, And this is for the panel. Anyone in the panel can take it, but would Simon like to try first?
Sure, I can start as the token lawyer.
Yes.
But I think Professor Valiant will have something to say about this as well. I'm sure Professor Villani also, because it really speaks to one of the key challenges of AI, which is partly the speed with which it operates, partly the autonomy with which it operates. But I think with machine learning in particular, it's the opacity of decision-making that raises real challenges.
Absolutely.
There are challenges there, but also some opportunities. The challenges are precisely, Francis, as your question raises. If we don't understand how a decision is made, how can we hold someone to account? And that might sound like it would apply across the board, but actually there are all sorts of areas of life where we don't really care about the fundamental understanding of what's going on. I mean, a trivial case, in days when we can fly, the fact that I don't understand the principles of aerodynamics doesn't prevent me getting on an airplane. Perhaps more relevantly, there are many medical technologies which we adopt, pharmaceuticals, for example, which we use because we've had statistical randomized trials and they're shown to work, even if at a molecular level we don't know exactly how they work. The situation is even more extreme in psychiatry, where there are many treatments where we don't actually know exactly how and why they work, but we allow them to go on. And I think there are some areas of life in the context of AI that we would be happy to allow AI to make certain decisions without necessarily requiring a high degree of explainability. But in areas that affect sort of rights and obligations, the sort of examples we've been talking about, hiring decisions, credit decisions, political decisions, then it is fundamental that we understand the reasons. And this is actually one of the opportunities of AI, that AI, at least at the moment, if you ask it a question, it will try to tell you the answer. And that is actually an opportunity here, that if you ask an AI system, if you interrogate it properly to say, are you biased against women or on the basis of ethnicity, often it will try to tell you the truth in a way that a human wouldn't. And this actually is one of the paradoxes, that in the context of AI explainability, I understand the call for AI explainability, but in some situations, we're almost holding AI to a higher standard than we hold humans. Because if you ask a human, are you sexist, racist, or whatever, he or she will almost never say yes. But we don't then require him or her to have a functional magnetic resonance imagery scan of the brain to determine whether he or she's telling the truth. So yeah, long way of saying, yes, it is a problem, but not in all areas. And in some situations, it might actually be easier to hold an AI system to account than it is to hold a human to account.
Are you saying, Simon, that machines have a sense of morality?
No, I'm saying exactly the opposite.
No, you said, you ask if the machine is biased, can the machine tell you that, yeah, I'm biased,
So if you ask a machine, and this is some of, I think Professor Villani was alluding to this,
yes.
There's the well-known studies of Amazon transferred much of its hiring to an algorithm which looked at 10 years of data and very quickly concluded, right, you don't want to hire women. And Amazon was horrified, but actually the machine learning process deduced certain information from their past history that actually helped to reveal human biases. So no, I mean, I defer to Professor Valiant on whether machines have morality, but my understanding is no, and that's actually a benefit in some circumstances.
Right. Would Professor Valiant or Villani like to make a comment here? And I sense that, in fact, Professor Villani, you mentioned that, in fact, in making decisions, human beings have biases. Of course, we have biases, and machines don't. But is that, in fact, what we are looking for? Totally unbiased decisions? Sometimes bias is good, because I know you've been working hard. I give you a few extra brownie points for that.
That sounds perfectly fair to me, but please.
Okay, let's make a few comments, because that's this fascinating issue. First, total unbiased does not exist. I mean, if you want to make something that is totally unbiased, you have to specify bias with respect to which and which and which and which, and you could put hundreds of traits with respect to which you should not be unbiased. It makes no sense. But think of this, for instance. There were studies made on human judges about things such as whether you would put such and such prisoner on parole, or whether you would sentence to which, how many years in jail you would sentence for this and that offense. And experiments done with good control, in which there is no a priori difference between the files, etc., has shown some amazing variance. Experience in Israel has showed from the parole difference in the probability to get the parole with going from with a ratio of 2 between the good hours and the bad hours, ratio of 2, in which factors such as whether the judge is tired, or whether the judge is hungry, or whether the judge is fed up, or whatever, it plays a role. It's normal. Human is not a machine. Human has some emotions, and the human has some physical, ties to reality. So whether when you are tired, you make bad decisions, it is clear. When the atmosphere around you has too high a concentration in CO2, then your intelligence is down. It's a fact. It has been measured, and you can even quantify the amount of IQ that you lose in that, etc., etc. So for that, and in another case which was studied in the US for federal offenses, it was found that really the number of years that you get in jail for some offenses can depend sometimes on the choice of the judge. Same judge can give you judge will give you 4 years in prison for the same offense. Another judge will give you 7 years in prison. This is fact observed and demonstrated. Yes. So in these issues, in these kinds of situations, you don't want such a bias. You want to be able to improve. In such a case, however, you don't want either to have an algorithm which makes a decision on you, because I would say by definition, a judiciary system is human beings, judges human beings. In the same way as for me, social security system is human beings taking care of human beings and so on. However, the machine could be able to assist you, facilitate the decision, give guidelines, help the human system progress. It is one way in which your machines can be able to help humans getting less biased. You may think that bias sometimes is a good thing, but there are so many bad biases around the world. Sexist biases, biases about race in many cases has been demonstrated and proven. Depending on the spelling of your name, you may get a grant or not. Yes. Just depending on the spelling of your name. And that machines can help us go over such biases.
Thank you. Professor Valiant, would you like to add anything or take a new question?
Well, just a comment. So I think the question may have been partly about, what you do in an individual case. If a decision that has been made, how do you complain? How do you get information? Right. And so on that, I think I agree with the earlier comment that in some sense we are holding machines to a higher standard than humans, because as humans, we're not really spoiled as far as getting explanations. So if you apply for a job and you're rejected, you don't get a very good explanation. And however much you ask, they'll never explain to you why you were rejected. So the idea of getting good explanations doesn't seem to be part of the human system we have. And so if we're replacing some of these human functions by machines, then we are challenging the machines to a higher standard, because we are insisting on better explanation. So there's a challenge to that, and it's not an easy question. It also depends that we don't quite know exactly what kind of explanations people want, and different people expect different kinds of explanations. What explanation would satisfy you, for example? I think it's a fundamental question, obviously, but no easy answers, I don't think.
Thank you. Hu Guoping has asked a question. Can you come on screen, please, Mr. Hu Guoping? Please press share audio and video and ask your question. Well, if we can't see him, can I just read the question to save time? Huh? If he comes on, that's great. AI is obviously an international trend and technology. Governing it properly would require enormous efforts globally, but globalization is facing quite some problems. Mr. Hu, are you there? Oh, there you are.
Yes, I'm here. It just took some time for me to get onto the camera. I'm not sure what's going on. Camera is not working. Hey, my name is Guoping. I'm from the University of Western Australia. Sorry about the camera, it's not working. But my question is about AI. It's also about globalization. Like, even the world standard is not working properly for every country. I mean, it works for some country, but not every country. As AI, it's obviously an international technology, and it's going to work for everybody around the world. Are they able to build a standard for this, and what do you see the future of it? Thank you.
So this is a basic global governance challenge, and I think it's been fascinating to watch these various initiatives, but a real wariness about adopting hard laws on the part of individual countries for the reason I was talking about earlier. They don't want to get left behind. Heng Chee mentioned at the outset the UNESCO's document. Probably the most prominent, not global, but at least regional document we have is the European Union's draft regulation. And I think the bet, and I defer to Cédric on this, but the bet that the EU is making is that there might be a kind of Brussels effect, much as data protection around the world has been forced now to look at the European General Data Protection Regulation. There is the possibility that you could do this with AI. The problem, I think, is that we've seen that the attraction of certain forms of AI has pulled the world in at least 3 different directions. And this is the approach that I see, at least. Slightly simplified, but it's worth outlining. The first is a very rights-based approach that we've seen in the European Union, linked with the protection of individual rights, linked with privacy most prominently, and we've seen that in the European context, and I assume most of you are at least aware of that. A second approach, which the United States typifies, has been a kind of market-oriented approach. The United States doesn't even have a federal data protection regulation. There has been some talk about regulating AI, but it's really the market that's been dominating this. And it's striking that after a series of scandals, it's the corporations, Facebook, Google, and others have come out asking for regulation. Yes. I think because they realize if they wait too long, the regulation will take the form of just breaking them up as entities rather than regulating the market that they hope to dominate. A third approach is the Chinese approach, which at least until very recently was very much sovereignty focused. So if you've got rights in the European Union, markets in the United States, sovereignty was China's focus. Developing its economy and ensuring its national interest, national security was being protected through things like data localization. But really in the last 12 months or so, we've seen a shift in China's position with the desire to rein in tech companies for both political and for economic reasons, but also police some things that are regarded as social ills. So you've seen the restraint of video games, the restrictions on tuition. So I think all of this points to a real bifurcation, or if you like, trifurcation of a global agenda, which means it's going to be very hard to get all states to play together. And you end up either with initiatives like the Global Partnership on AI, which the United States ultimately joined precisely because it was excluding China, and that was part of a rivalry between them, or you have documents like UNESCO's, which, to be candid, are pretty thin gruel and would impose a very low level of responsibility, low levels on the governments, and intentionally non-binding.
Yes. Now, I'm going to go to the questions because there are so many questions now. This is for Professor Leslie Valiant from Ahmed Bayat. Ahmed, are you there? Maybe I'll read your question. We can see your face in the interest of time. From Ahmed Bayat, do you think the future of AI lies in the combination of search and learning? Could such a paradigm solve some of the issues with learning? Is for Professor Valiant.
Yes.
Ahmed, thank you.
Yes, what I'm interested in, have been for a long time, is combining learning with reasoning. So reasoning is related to search. So if you, the deficiencies of AI now, which the sense in which AI gives you bad decisions, I think many of those could be improved by incorporating reasoning with learning. So reasoning in the sense of traditional logic, but it should be adapted to work with machine learning. So I think there's this, of course, GYSS is a science conference, so there's also a question of what room is there for scientists to contribute to these questions. And so one area clearly is to make AI decisions, better. So I think there's a very big scientific scope for extending machine learning to encompass other capabilities, in particular reasoning. Yes, so I think I agree with the questioner.
Thank you. I'm going to pass the next question to Professor Villani. JJ Awodipe? Yes. Sorry, that's Ahmad Bayat, but is JJ Awodipe here? His question, or her question, is what would you say that having an interdisciplinary team in the advancement of AI technologies is important to combat bias, or limitations is for Professor Villani. Should you have an interdisciplinary team in your advancement of AI technologies?
I will say first that AI in itself is interdisciplinary. It's partly computer science, partly mathematics, partly statistics, and partly whatever else subject you're working on. If you are doing AI for mobility, you need some experts in mobility, experts in car, and experts in all the techniques which are needed to build a car. If you are making AI for defense, you need to have experts in defense. If it's AI for environment, you need to have experts in environment. And actually, it's extremely interdisciplinary in the way it works. Projects in AI which work and produce things are often projects in which you have team which is experts in algorithmic working closely with a team which is experts in whatever subject you want to make advanced. It may be the logistic of an installation, it may be the transportation or whatever. And because the subject has turned very much experimental, you need often this collaboration to be run in the long term with trust among the people who are in this. This also is true for AI in relation with science. There's a debate about whether some people will say there's a debate whether AI is science or whether it's technology or whether it's engineering. But it's true that AI can be incorporated within science. We could just run some examples. Nowadays with AI, you try to understand how the catalysis works by working out the shapes of the molecules and which effects you can expect from their spherical configuration. Or in some other projects, use AI to detect through the use of medicine what are combinations of medicine which have some positive resonance effect and so on. In all these situations, you have some guesses or some signals to some AI experiments which you are hoping to transform into new science, new knowledge. And this can be done only through an interdisciplinary approach. This is also true for the social sciences approach, of course, when you have about the effects of AI on the work and job, employment, etc. The conclusions will have to be derived through an interdisciplinary approach involving human and social sciences.
Thank you. Now, can we have the sound louder, please, because it's beginning to tail off. Now, there's a question here which is quite interesting. It's from Ayan Nusubekov. Can we see Ayan? Can you press on share video, audio and video, the orange box? Now, the question is, there you are. Would you like to read out your question? Yeah.
So my question is, so let's say that AI has progressed so much that you could use it to run the government, so that potentially exclude the bias of ruling people, like no corruption, nepotism, and etc. and etc. And what do you think that how would this backfire in the long run? Yeah.
And you are from, Ayan? Where are you from?
Sorry. I'm from Singapore. I'm the student, PhD student in NTU.
From?
From Singapore, he said.
I know. Oh, you're from Singapore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm from Singapore, but yeah, I'm my country. Originally, I'm from Kazakhstan.
I thought so. I saw your name, so yes. Now, would anyone like to try this?
I like to say, since I also have the position, let me say that it would be completely current state of technologies or foreseeable future of technologies, totally unrealistic to have AI type governments. First, the complexity of action that you have to take in politics, even good faith action, I mean, not with a crook or whatever, is amazing. And when you are immersed in it, you realize how much there are various types of configuration, situations. It would be impossible to a priori think of all these issues when you want to program the AI. It has to take into account interpersonal relations and the geography and the culture and the fact that somebody knows somebody who has a contact in there and whatever. It's absolutely unrealistic for that. Also, let me say, when you want to stop a practice by go to the extreme of the something that is totally unfalsifiable, you may run into difficulties. We went through, it's not just about AI. Let me give you a historical example, which is extremely interesting and treated by various authors, is the invention of the meter. You know, meter was invented in France at around 1800 when the revolutionaries, they wanted to get rid of the system of the ancient regime in which there were tens of thousands of different units of measure for the length and whatever all around the country. And they said, okay, let's have one unit and we'll make it universal, so it will be defined through first measuring the Earth, it was crazy, measuring the Earth and deciding that the meter is 1 divided by 40 million, the length of the Earth, the circumference of the Earth. When the meter was put in place, it was big trouble. In particular, one of the trouble was that this perfect conversion was killing an economy which was taking advantage of little margins and conversion rates to have some little bit of money going here and there. In the same way that when you transfer money from one country to another currency, then there is a little bit of difference which is taken by the bank or whatever. All that economy which was local and useful to the people and so on was destroyed immediately, and this was a lot of problems. It was one of the reasons why eventually France abandoned the meter a few years later, 1807, before going back to it quite later. We should not go to the extreme of trying to find a solution which is perfectly virtuous.
Thank you. Now, you know, we're running out of time, but there's a very good question, highly voted, and I would like to get the comments of all the panelists. The question comes from Mustafa Umit Honor. Mustafa, would you come on the screen, please? And he asks, I think AI is mostly produced in rich countries, but it is consumed by people all over the world. What are the potential risks of that? How can we bring production of AI to all the world? Thanks. Mustafa, can we see you? But would you begin?
Sure, it is a great question, and I can tell you the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU, has a whole series on AI for good and how AI can assist in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. But AI, again, offers both a threat and an opportunity. The threat, I think, has been alluded to by a couple of us, that this tool of great efficiency has resulted in all sorts of benefits for many of us, but the greatest economic consequence of that has been the accumulation of great wealth by small numbers of companies. And so you just look at the biggest companies in the world, they're the companies often with the most data. I don't need to go through the list. So there's that risk of AI basically exacerbating inequality. The potential benefit, however, and this is what the ITU and others have been discussing, is that many of the challenges of developing countries are challenges of efficient allocation of resources, of the ability to develop new technologies in a sustainable way. And AI, in terms of its optimization ability, offers great potential there. And so the example I use in the legal sector is that in some areas of dispute settlement, for example, there is a possibility that using AI tools, you could do for legal sectors what the mobile phone did for the telecommunications sector, that rather than having to go through the stage of developing landlines and then developing mobile telephones, many developing countries went straight to mobile telephones and therefore leapfrogged that stage. So there is at least a possibility, if it is fairly distributed, if it is equitably distributed.
Yes. Would Leslie like to say something?
Well, yes, just so by its nature, it's like mathematics, anyone can practice anywhere in the world. It doesn't need any investment. So AI has some of that flavor. Obviously, data is a factor, but there's no fundamental reason why scientists around the world in any country not pursue AI. So I think that's an optimistic direction, that the science of AI, there could be something democratic in that, although there isn't very much evidence at the moment of that.
Mm-hmm. And Cédric?
Yes, I will add something. As yes, AI skills are distributed all around the world. This I'm quite confident of. But the economic, which will allow for the rise of data, the emergence of data and so on, differs very vastly from country to country. Also, the culture may differ very vastly from country to country. Let me give you one example. As consequence of my report, it was decided that in France we would set up a national platform of health data, so that the hospitals and the companies doing medicine, etc., can compare, feed with data, make some conclusions, etc. 4 years later, this health data hub is still not operational. It's not an issue of skills, it's not an issue of technique, it's an issue of culture and politics, because it's a very sensitive issue, especially in France, because of the past history and issues with in particular Second World War. It's a very sensitive issue about what is a national platform of personal data run by the state. Always makes a lot of anxiety in the population and the newspapers and the media and in the administration. And so this cultural obstacle is even much more difficult to solve than the technical obstacle. And that we know intelligence is very widely distributed around the world, but culture is extremely different from one country to one country and continent to another continent.
Thank you. I see the sign "Time's Up" is there, and we did start a little late. Oh, thank you very much. I can still carry on because I see a lot of questions coming up. And now, which should I choose? There is one by Ravin Champua, which says, would human-powered AI, for example, explainable AI, that trains the human soft skills like empathy and compassion, will they solve the ethical concerns problem?
Look, one sentence.
Yes.
If the problems of ethics could be solved by an algorithm, humans would have solved them in the thousands of years we've been grappling with these questions. So no, I don't think it would solve the problems. Yes. And I'm very wary of the kind of outsourcing of AI, of ethics to AI principles. But Leslie might be more optimistic.
Well, no, on ethics, I agree. It's up to humans to choose there.
And Cédric, agree?
Agree.
Thank you.
But it's a great question. Thanks for asking.
Thank you. Right. I have time for one more. So this comes from Philip Derag. I have concerns in our dependency on AI. If AI gives erroneous data, how can we confirm or rely on the data and answers that are given? How does one argue with AI when we do not know the answer ourselves? Here's Philip on the screen. Where are you from, Philip? Please identify yourself.
I'm from Ireland in Dublin.
Thank you.
So yeah, so that's just my concern, that like if you're using AI and you're dependent on it, how can you convince yourself that the AI is correct? Like, because there may be errors, and because of that, it might affect the results.
Yeah, so if I can make an obvious comment, so if someone publishes some medical study, then they usually tell you what the data set of patients is based on. So presumably one needs some standards that if you rely on an AI system which is trained on some data, you'd want to know what the data was. So an AI system divorced from the data on which it's trained doesn't make sense. I think one should just have more common sense expectations of one wants information about the nature of AI system, what data is trained on, maybe how it works. So I think one doesn't need to treat AI as being an unknowable black box, because we do understand some things about it, and if one treats it a bit more rationally and consistently, I think some of these problems could be addressed.
Would you like
Let me also add, in some sense, humans are black boxes. What do we know of how this guy thinks? However, first, if somebody is able to make a task so many times, then we trust this guy, this pilot who has flown so many planes and so on. And second, there is some natural way to build the trust between human beings, which is part of our biology. There are people we trust, people we don't trust, etc. I believe very much when we say we want to trust a technology, actually the trust will go to either somebody or to a company. Maybe you trust the company who will develop the software, or maybe you trust the person who is developing the software, etc. And very often we focus so much attention on why would we trust this technology, and not enough attention about why we should trust this company or this person.
Maybe I'll just address the flip side of this, which is the so-called automation bias, that we as humans tend to put undue weight in the competence of machines. And there's actually an interesting market example of this. Many of you listening will know the Society of Automotive Engineers levels of automation for driverless vehicles, for autonomous vehicles. Level 1, basically you're still doing most things. Level 2, it does things like lane assist, cruise control. Level 3, you can let go of the wheel, but you've got to be ready to grab it at any moment. Level 4, you can basically go to sleep. Level 5, there might not even be a steering wheel. Most car companies have now decided they're not going to do level 3 because it is the most dangerous. Because most of us, if we're driving, we can pay attention. But we're very bad at sort of letting a machine do something, but then being ready to seize back the wheel. And most car companies have now concluded that would be a disaster, because that's essentially what happened with back in 2018 in Arizona, when the first pedestrian was killed by an autonomous vehicle because the driver, in theory, was meant to be ready to seize the wheel. And in fact, she was watching a streaming episode of something on her telephone instead.
Thank you. Right.
Sorry, let me add something, because what Professor Chesterman said is quite important, and I'd like to reinforce even this with some analogy. There's a debate about, in many countries, should we impose that people who cycle in the roads, etc., on the street, wear helmets?
Yes.
And associations of defense of the bicycles insisted that you should not impose this rule because it is bad for cycling. And there are several reasons, and it's explained. And one of the reasons is that if you impose this, then there will be less people driving. For instance, I don't have this helmet, I can't take this the self-service bicycle, which is etc. So it will diminish the number of users. The number of users doing cycle goes down, then the people who run in the cars are less used to them. The number of cyclists is less enforced. It drives the entire behavior. So in this case, the security gained by the number of people who cycle is superior to the security gained by the helmet. And you can see this in statistics. The countries which imposed the helmet for the cyclists did not see the numbers of accidents go down. Quite not. So this is an example. You could see if you put too much regulation on some AI tools, then maybe there are less AI tools that will be used. So there will be less opportunities for the society to get used to them and to improve the behavior. So we do have also an effect related to the number, which may go in counteraction to the effect which is gained by the security that you put on the software.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think we have reached we've really exceeded our hour. But can I just squeeze in one little question to the panel? Well, I know that we've been looking at very immediate and sort of immediate use of AI questions, but can I ask a more philosophical question here, which is, Professor Valiant, you deal with technology, You know, Simon, you look at regulation, and Cédric, you sort of work out the strategies of AI for the government. But, you know, I'm a layman, layperson, laywoman. And I worry that, I ask myself, what happens to human nature when machine learning and the machine takes over? You know, what is the point of being a human being? Leslie?
Well, okay, well, I think you should worry less than you do. That
We are far from there, is it? Are we far from that stage?
I don't think machines.
Oh, sorry.
I don't think it could be in that sense. Okay, so don't worry.
Cédric, after you.
As a politician, there are so many subjects I'm worried of. Each day I feel like I'm seeing the doom of mankind coming, but the list of dooms isn't the subject you mentioned is not on my list. There are so many ways that mankind can die, but not that one you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I think at the heart of your question is something that I worry about a little bit, which is that AI is great at optimization.
Absolutely.
But not all of life is just optimization.
You make a human being redundant.
Well, yeah, to get us as quickly as possible, to earn as much and to spend as much as possible. Life is about more than that. And it actually goes back to the earlier question about the sort of worst case scenarios. I worry less about politicians being replaced by AI than politics being dominated by AI. And if you want a kind of scary example, I'll conclude with a well-known the paperclip parable that Nick Bostrom popularized, which the only way you could have AI politicians is if AI had power. And then the problem is, what would you tell the AI to do? And this example, this trivial example, was you told an AI system, an all-powerful superintelligence, to make paperclips. And then it would work out very quickly that the only way to keep making paperclips is, one, prevent anyone ever switching it off. So you must kill all the humans. And then you can deploy their atoms to make ever more paperclips. And this is clearly a ludicrous example, but I think it points to one of the concerns we have about AI, which is that it can be very efficient, very powerful, but it lacks common sense. And common sense is something that we as humans take for granted. But as we think about the future of AI, I think we should also think about precisely our role and the future of humanity.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I thank on behalf of NRF, I would like to thank Professor Valiant, Professor Villani, and Professor Chesterman, and our audience for being with us this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye.